Alright, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. I've been going through a series of video presentations I've created for the two textbooks that are used for the Rankin Technical College AWD, that's Application and Web Development, 1000 Web Development Technologies class. These two books are Murox HTML5 and CSS3 4th edition, 20 chapters worth of PowerPoints, and I've done all those already. And also Murox JavaScript and jQuery 3rd edition. Well, I have done the first 7 chapters, and I decided to change up the order a little bit. So I've also done 13, 14, 15, 16, and now I'm going to do Chapter 17. Tomorrow I'll come in and do 18, and hopefully also finish up as many of 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 as I can between tomorrow and Friday. All right, so with that said, let's jump into Chapter 17. It is one of the more complex chapters, probably other than Chapter 18, the hardest JavaScript-oriented chapter that's in this book. And it's on how to create objects. You will have to, we probably won't have time to go over this in much depth and breadth of coverage in class. Okay, so whatever you'll learn a little bit in class and probably more on your own. So we'll talk about how to create your own objects. Objects contain properties and methods. We'll talk about what those are. Factory functions, JavaScript libraries, some of the different kinds of objects that are available in JavaScript. Explain how two variables can refer to the same object. Describe JavaScript libraries. Factory functions again. Cascading methods, prototyping, the use of the this keyword, and there's other stuff. So the JavaScript hierarchy of some of the native object types. So every time you create a date, all right, you're creating a date object. When you create a new array, you're creating an array object. When you create a function, you're creating a function object, etc. I'm not going to read all those to you. All right. So one way that you can do this, and the way you typically do it with all objects, other than with an array, is you say var, the name of the object, equals new, and then the object type, which may or may not, which will have parens, but may or may not have something in it. All right. So to say var last name equal hopper is the same thing as saying var last name equals new string hopper. All right. This is just a shortcut for saying it. Here's another one and another one. And typically you use those shortcuts whenever possible, including the one for an array, just because it results in less typing on your part. All right. Sometimes, though, you want to create your own new object. And one way to do that is like this. You can either say var invoice is the name of your object equals, notice it's curly braces, or you can say var invoice equal new object paren. Now, an object is something that holds properties and methods. Think about a human being. What properties do we have? We've got a height, we've got a weight, we've got a gender, we've got an eye color, a hair color, etc. All right, those would be our properties. We also have methods. We eat, we sleep, we drink, etc. All right, so the author shows in here, here's a length property of a built-in object, so of a string. Here's the toFixed for a number. When you create your own properties, when you create your own objects and you give them properties and methods, they're only as smart as the properties and methods you give them. They can only do what you put in as far as properties and methods. You know, I went through this with a class, a couple years ago. We did an exercise. And, I said, okay, so we're going to make a person object. And we did. And we said, and what can that person do? And somebody said they can drink, and they can eat, etc. So we just left it right there. Okay, in fact, we said, what can they do? We said eat and sleep. That was it. It was just two things. Just eat and sleep. And then later somebody said, well, what about drink? And I said, that person cannot drink because we did not give them that ability, which they thought was funny. But I said, no, we're creating our own objects. So when we create our own objects, they only have the properties and the methods we give them. All right, so here's an invoice object that we're creating that only has a property. It's got a property called tax rate. Notice the colon right there. All right, and the tax rate looks like it's 8 3/4%. Here's an object. We're creating the same object, but instead of giving it a property, we're giving it a method. Again, notice the name of the method, colon, function. Okay. Now you can go and you can put properties and methods in your own object, and that's what they're showing here. When you do this, all right, and you want to go and actually refer to something, it's the name of the object dot the name of the method or the name of the object dot the name of the property. And there's some examples here. Now, is it more complex than that? Of course it is. You can even take one object and put another object in it. So this is an invoice object which has as part of it a terms object. All right, and then notice you start doing what's called chaining, because it's the name of the first object dot the name of the second or inner object dot the name of the property. So we could have also said alert invoice.terms.due days. All right. So once you created an object, you could even come back and add additional properties and methods at a later time. You can modify an existing object. All right. So why would you want to do that? Because sometimes when you create an object, you may not have all the facts, or something may be created later, or something may change later where you've got to modify the object. And that means that you can come in and add new things, modify existing things, or delete existing things. All right. If I do something like this, the thing to realize is when you create an object, what happens is you get a memory location of where that object lives. So if we do this, if we say var today equal new date, okay, then we get this date object in memory someplace. If we say var now equal today, notice they're both pointing to the same memory location. So we can change things or reference things using either today or now. So now has become an alias for today. Okay, that's just a beginning. So let's talk JavaScript libraries. Why do most people use a library? Because it probably would be too expensive to go out and buy every book they'd be interested in buying. All right. What you can do with a library is you can take code that typically you might often use, and you can group it together into a single file, and maybe multiple files depending on how big your library is. Just like, do you have one book or do you have multiple books? Okay. Ideally, what a library does, as mentioned there, is it makes your code easier to understand, maintain, and reuse. It encourages that separation of concerns. We've talked about this. We talked about separating our HTML from our CSS, from our JavaScript. We talked about taking our CSS and putting it either inline, internal, or external. We talked about taking our JavaScript and putting it either inline, internal, or external. In all those cases, or the last two, we said that both with our CSS and our JavaScript, it was better to take that stuff and make it external, so we have that separation of concerns. All right? The old saying, a place for everything, everything in its place, type of an idea. So we could come in here and notice in this example, this is a library file called librarympg.js. What are we doing in here? We're creating a miles per gallon file. All right. Then we can add that file right there. That's that first yellow one, along with our own file. Then our own file can reference the other file. All right. It may not make a whole boatload of sense until you actually get to practice it and take a look at it. This is not the type of material, in my humble opinion, that you're able to look at. It makes sense. Boom. You'll have to look at it a few times, practice it, play with it. All right, so they give you the HTML and they give you the JavaScript for this. Now, when you create a new object, one of the things you can do is create what's called a constructor. for that object. All right, and typically you always will do this anyway. Now here we're creating a new object that's called Invoice. All right, and we're telling it that when we create it, we want to be able to pass in a subtotal and a tax rate, for lack of better words. In fact, we're not even going to pass them in. Okay, there are no parameters. Here it's the same thing, but we are passing in 2 parameters. Okay? All right. Now we're changing gears a little bit, because one way that you can add things to an existing object is by using what's called the prototype method. All right. Let me just mention something to you that, again, may or may not make sense. All right. In a true object-oriented programming language, such as Java, if all I want to do is write hello on the screen, I have to create a class. And a class is what's known as a blueprint. It's not important, but the point is, in a true object-oriented programming language, everything you do is class-based. If you think about it, we're on Chapter 17 of an 18-chapter book, and we've never talked about objects before. So unlike a language like Java, JavaScript is not truly object-oriented. It's what's called object-based, which means that it has object-oriented features which you can choose to use or not use. The advantage of using object-oriented programming in any language, be it an object-oriented language like Java or C# or an object-based language like JavaScript or PHP, is you can get a lot more code reuse when you start using objects. All right. So they show you different ways that you can create objects, how you can, notice this is called the dot syntax, the name of the object dot the name of whatever. All right, to either grab the value or to call one of the built-in routines. All right. So here's something using objects that we've looked at before. We've had a chapter with the date object. So we're creating 2 date objects right here using the date class, and then we're alerting them out. Okay. So code that adds a method to a prototype object. Well, if we came through here and we added this numeric date string, then instead of showing it like this, we could show it like this. We could add another method that would figure out the day of the year that, let's say tax day is day 73 of the year, and Christmas is day 360 of the year, etc. We could figure that kind of stuff out. We could add yet another prototype, another method to the prototype object to do that if we wanted to. All right. We can do this on a basis where we do it for every object of that type or just certain objects. We can even use on a single object and have it do what's called override, or take the place of what normally would happen. So there's so much terminology in here, so many things to be aware of. All right, I'm not going to read all these. So they come in here and notice what they've got is an application that's a trip log. So you say where you're going, how many miles it took you to get there, how many gallons of gas you used. Very similar to the MPG program we've looked at, but it'll tell you how many, let's see, miles driven 75. I don't know where they got the 350 from. I'm not sure. All right. But it allows you to log all of your trips, all right, and then go through all of them and figure out your cumulative miles per gallon. This would be really nice, especially if you were a salesperson, for example, and you wanted to do this, or anyone who traveled on a regular basis using their vehicle that wanted to find out their MPG. So they show you the HTML, very little bit of CSS, and then the library. Now notice it's a library file for calculating MPG and doing a few other things. Then they've got the main JavaScript file. So what you can put in a library file is unlimited. You can have more than one library file. But let's suppose that I had a job where I was a JavaScript programmer where I was constantly doing some kind of sorting on different lists. Might be numeric lists, might be strings, might be something else. I don't know. But I could write myself generic routines that I could put into a library file and then call those routines from my regular JavaScript file on an as-needed basis. I'd be able to share code. And every time I would go and run it, I'd be, again, practicing, testing my code that's already been tested. All right, let's check my time here. I'm at 16 minutes and I'm just about exactly halfway through. So before doing this create method of the object, I'm going to stop and make this a two-parter, so I'll be back shortly.